Most leaders say they're data-driven, but really, they're gut-feeling driven with nicer dashboards. In today's episode of the Business Emergency Room, I sit down with Nissim Titan, CEO and founder of Forecast AI, to explore how AI-powered decision intelligence helps you cut through data overload, reduce human bias, and run thousands of scenarios whilst you sleep. We go from evacuating cities and managing crisis to fine-tuning everyday business choices. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. I'm very excited about today's topic and today's guest. We are going to talk about my favorite topic and the hot topic of the day. We are going to talk about decision making and AI. And I have a great guest to talk about that today. My guest today is Nissim Titan, or Titan, if you want to do it the European way. And he is the CEO and founder of Forecast. So he works in the decision intelligence space and is one of the first really, or the ones who is leading the way in combining artificial intelligence and decision making to help businesses make faster, smarter, and more transparent decisions. He's worked over 2 decades in the AI space, and he's worked in all sorts of industries ranging from defense and energy and utilities, the whole gamut. An engineer by background. So I am very excited that you're here. Welcome, Nissim.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm also excited being here and want to tell you that I love to hear your podcasts, and I think you're doing a great job and very interesting issues and topics.
Thank you so much. So let's start maybe painting a little bit the picture of what you do and where that sits. When I talk about decision making, I talk about decision making frameworks. I talk about how to break through decision paralysis and the systems. Could you describe a bit in more detail, or maybe with some examples, what it is that you really do and what parts of the decision making process and intelligence you bring together?
Sure. So a little bit about what Forecast does. So we developed an AI-powered decision intelligence platform where our idea was helping leaders achieve their long-term goals by making better day-to-day decisions. One of the gaps that we have as decision makers is that we're not really decision makers. We don't really get options. We just get problems, disruptions. We don't know what we need to take care of. And the idea was creating options. And how do we do it? The idea was managing so we can run risk assessments and use different AI techniques, like modeling and simulation, and give them better options so they understand the impact of their day-to-day decisions on long-term goals. But to do that, you need to go through the whole decision-making process. So it's not just technology. It's about mapping their decision-making process, talking about resilient decision-making, running all those parameters, creating those models, those behavior models, and then you can help them and assist them with options so they get a little bit, I won't say more certainty, but higher certainty when they make a decision. So that's what we're trying to achieve. I started a lot of years ago, mainly the defense market, because there, was the major gap. But then we saw it, working with emergency managers. We see it now in utilities and everywhere. I think, myself as a decision maker would love to have options and not just problems. We have a problem, we have a disruption, but okay, how can we manage it? So that's what we're trying to achieve here. And I think, that today with how AI evolved is very helpful, using technology.
Yeah, for sure, right? So as a reminder, in the course of the decision-making process is that you frame up your decision. So you're trying to, if you have a really big decision, that you maybe carve it out to something smaller, that you pitch it such that it's something you can actually work, not too big, not too small. Indeed, options, right? Put options on the table. The reality often is that there's always one option that's way more mature than anything else, which is the current way of doing business, right? And there's often options on the table that have very varying levels of definition. And because we're risk averse, we have a preference for options that are better defined because they're less scary, but they're not necessarily the better option, right? So that, yeah, totally logical why being able to run a lot of data can help in the maturation of those options. And then good decision making, of course, is also about trade-offs and about actually having relevant information. So it's fabulous, of course, that you have a platform that will allow you to run all sorts of scenarios and really de-risk the decision-making process. I think the nature of a good decision is not necessarily that it's flawless, but it's the best decision you can make in the moment. And if we talk defense and turmoil and emergencies, it's the least risky or the safer decision. Often that's the better one. So can you talk me through how the challenge of too much data and more data, because in decision making, we often also get stranded because we have too much data, right? How what you do and actually helps with that challenge.
Yeah, so first of all, decision intelligence is a different concept. So you're talking about data. At the end of the day, we have too much data, and you're so correct. And the idea is, like you mentioned, how can I help with all this data, give them options, but explain in those options what's the trade-off? Because there's never the best option. What's the risk, the impact, and what is the trade-off of every option? So today we work with organizations that, everyone starts from the data. It's a different concept. Let's have those data lakes. I don't have enough data. And I can tell you, at least from my experience, that they need just 20% of the data they have. 80%, it's a lot of garbage in, garbage out that they have. And decision intelligence is a different concept. Let's understand the goal of the organization. Who's the main stakeholders? What kind of decisions they need to make? It's like being an architect. Let's plan the building and then decide how we're going to build it, and not let's start building something and then decide why we're building this building. So that's the idea of decision intelligence. And we see a lot of success once you sit down and understand, their goals, their gaps. Then you start mapping down, all those models. And when I talk about models, it's creating those KPIs and metrics that actually need data, because those are questions that need an answer. And suddenly you understand I only need 20% of the data I already have. And most of my data is not good data, not validated. And that's a better process from my perspective, at least from my experience. That's where we had success with state emergency managers or NATO customers or utility companies speaking about, their grid resilience regarding floods and different disruptions that happen. So too much data bothers. Use technology, use Gen AI, use other tools to manage your data, but use other techniques and concepts and approaches to answer your decision-making processes.
Yeah, and there's no decision-making framework that starts with information or data, right? They all start with what is the decision we're trying to make? What are we trying to solve for? Where are we trying to go?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that decision intelligence mapping, what decisions, now let's map everything, then let's understand from where we can get answers, is a very good approach.
Can you talk me through also a little bit, there is like over 170 biases, right, that we have as humans that filter into decision making. What are some of the main ones that actually using artificial intelligence will really help us do better on? Is it across the board? Is there some specific areas in which, having something operate based on really factual data?
So first of all, I think it's across the board. But if I can think about a few examples, I'll give you an example from working with emergency managers. I have two good examples, I think. We worked with one of the states in the US, and the challenge was trying to mitigate a disaster up front. And, they say, okay, every year we have the same floods, we have the same problems, we have the same roads to evacuate. They bring, a little bit of their consultants, a little bit of GIS using tools, but all of their data, and of course, us as humans, we're biased. we're biased. And then you run everything, with a different approach, and suddenly there's option number 3. And you understand that what you plan to evacuate, you can evacuate by sea suddenly, and you will need to evacuate more people. And the shelters you were planning to evacuate will be flooded. So suddenly, wow, a different approach. That shows us that, with the best people, best tools, we have a lot of bias. And another thing that we saw in that area was regarding different communities. So, there's communities that are, for example, more vulnerable in those cases. But a lot of the old data that there is in us as humans, there's bias that in this area, we don't need to take care of people. And those are challenges that I think that, AI can solve. Because the machine at the end of the day is not biased. You need to train it, of course. You need to be very careful. Once you create those models, you need to run them. You need to have experts look at them. But at the end of the day, they will take out not 100%, but let's say most of the bias, in my opinion.
And what I'm really hearing you say is that when we work these challenges, we are limited in our capacity in the number of scenarios that we can run and are willing to run. And by using a platform like yours, I wouldn't say it becomes infinite, but because you still need to structure the parameters around it, but you can run infinitely more scenarios. It might throw up stuff that initially looks a bit like, oh, we would never do that, but actually challenges for you to look at the problem again and say, actually, this is not entirely crazy.
Exactly.
And it might still need a little bit bringing back to reality, because the system maybe is missing some boundaries that exist in reality, but still it can fantasize all night long while you sleep, right?
Exactly. And that, I think, is where a lot of times, we speak a lot about AI agents and agentic AI. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I always joke with people. I tell them I did AI when it wasn't called AI, but we did a lot of agent-based simulation. And today we're doing AI agents. And we ran a fire, some kind of disruption in a building. And, we teach the system how we behave. What's our doctrine? So everyone's looking for the exit. Everyone's looking how to evacuate the building. But the agent, what he did is he opened the window, for example, and looked down and said, oh, it's the first floor. So maybe we can evacuate, it's not a big jump. So those are the different situations, just a small example, so people can understand it, that we can train those agents, we can play with them, like you said, put the boundaries. And I think we will be in better places and they will help us. But the idea at the end of the day, in decision making, there will always be a man in the loop. The AI will bring the data faster. It will create the options. It will bring more accurate information. It will take out bias. But at the end of the day, there will be a man in the loop looking at those 3 options and say, okay, let's go with option number 1. But we can ask hundreds of questions a day and not bring, a team of 20 consultants for a month to answer 1 question.
Yeah, and it's intriguing to me, or interesting to me to see. I worked in disaster response too, right? And so decision making simply works a little different in that I feel there's always been this willingness to explore more and quicker, right? Which I think what you're doing is showing that there's certain industries that were earlier interested in pursuing something like this, because even in the early days when you don't quite trust the system immediately, right, that you might not have all the boundaries in place, as long as you put in enough verification, human verifications, or before you execute random orders that come out of a system, it can really help you in the moment. As you say, if you're so busy running around and you're in a building that you don't know, that somebody reminds you that you're only on the first floor, right? Or it's the second floor in the US, right? But 1 level off the ground, that's very helpful. You work clearly with some complex industries that are running emergency scenarios of all sorts. Can you talk a bit about how you see this move more and more into more conventional decision making, where the challenges maybe are more of a monetary value and less of a risk or safety or business grid disruption type nature, right? Is that very different or same difference and just a logical evolution into that?
Well, I think it's the same. And we've been working, with other organizations. The idea is, first of all, giving you the right picture, bringing some kind of integrated solution, looking at your workforce, at your IT, at the whole resilience of your organization. And remember, every decision maker, doesn't matter if he's an emergency manager or a CEO of a software company, makes a lot of decisions. And we talk about disruptions. I think after COVID, everyone started speaking that disruption is some kind of pandemic, a big flood. But disruption is also this morning that 10% of your employees are sick, or your CTO is retiring, for example. Disruption, there are small disruptions, right? Disruption is that my teenager son made a mess in the kitchen and my wife is angry, and that's a decision I need to make, right? What to do, clean those dishes or not. So I have my options. And when I go to different organizations, different companies, we work also with a lot of startups and software companies, just helping them. And you see that the decision-making process is the same. What are your goals? What are your behaviors? What is your process? What you're trying to achieve in the short term and long term? And now let's talk what is happening now, right? I have to deliver software to one of my customers. But suddenly I understand that there is a gap in my roadmap in my development team. Okay, this will create some kind of disruption of customer satisfaction. So what should I do? Give me some options, make a decision. It doesn't need to be just a flood, just a big disaster. I think the same concept, same methodology, same processes, same things that you spoke about, the decision mapping and all those ideas are all over the board. Of course, it can be, much lower level solution that doesn't need this amount of data, like you need when you manage an emergency in a state level.
But what I'm also hearing or thinking is I myself was affected by the whole CrowdStrike debacle, right? That summer day where all these airports around the globe fell still and all that. And particularly in the US, Southwest had a hard time because they had no real redundancy to their schedule of their Southwest was actually okay because they had a lot of their stuff offline. I think it was Delta, but one of the airlines had an issue because their scheduling of where their flights were and where their staff were, and then rejigging that schedule was really hard for them when their core system was affected. So I would assume that if you have a system like this and you have that logic, that in a scenario like that, they would have been able to plug in at least the pieces that they did have and try to navigate their way out of this by coming up with different scenarios, how to at least get these resources, the crews that they did have and the planes in the place where they were moving again. Does that work like that?
Yeah, and I think there's another phase before. The first phase is running those scenarios before something happens and understanding your resilience, your gaps, and maybe, creating those business continuity plans, understanding where you will have a problem. But once it happens, you're so correct. They could have run those different scenarios, got maybe better options, better things they didn't think about. A lot of times it creates, you talked about it, there's like a fog. And it creates clarity, a little bit of more clarity, giving you a little bit more options, higher certainty. That's the idea. That's the concept. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And I think, it's a decision. It's a change a little bit in decision making. But if you look at it, I'm doing it for more than 20 years. It's been always the same concept. You can you can use different technology, but the concept of decision making, mapping it, being prepared, doing it in advance, that's the idea. And I think today with AI, you just can bring faster results and an integrated picture to the decision makers in a fast manner.
Yeah, and you can also really link in the information real time, right? So in the example we were talking about, I think the examples where people said, "Oh, my airline did better," or "I had at least a better experience," was where there was individuals who were working at airports or for airlines or for organizations who did the best they could, right? So they were saying, like, listen, you're not traveling today, book a hotel. This is what we can do for you. Realistically, it's going to take till the end of the day before we can talk to you, right? So creating a sense of reality. But if that's now backed up by that individual being able to put in the system saying, this is what I told people at this airport, and this is what I sent them and the instructions I gave them, and that happens at different points, and the system can work with that, you can actually give these people something back and say, great, now the next step is that we're going to offer them this or do this, right? You can actually work this challenge much quicker and more effectively if you can bring all these different elements of your decision making and of the challenge back into that logic that's already there.
Yeah, you're so correct there, and I think one of the things that I really love, it's resilient decision making, because at the end of the day, when something happens, like you mentioned, there's airports not working, it's making decisions under pressure, and I think with the help or enablement of these technologies and AI, it helps you bounce back faster, understand all the data, what's going on. So not everything is real time, maybe near real time. They just inputted some more data in that train station or things like that, but it will help you bounce back very fast, understand the situation, get some options, make the right decision. But it all depends if you're going that way. If your organization is starting to talk about these technologies, embed them in your organization, talk about your decision processes, run those risks, on a, let's say, not day-to-day basis, but at least, on a monthly basis in your organization, be prepared and then use those technologies in real time.
Yeah. Yeah. And acknowledge to ourselves, right, that these really big decisions, once they're made, they also should or typically lead to a big step or a big leap. But that in the decision making process, you also need to make a bunch of smaller decisions where you actually take some small steps to get progressive insight to make the bigger decision, right? And that logic, I call that the corporate memory. And too often, once that big decision is made, some of these smaller maneuverings and explorations, like, okay, let's at least try this a bit or try, some of that is not captured, and can actually be very useful insight to course correct. Because if you're then down a certain path and it's not entirely working, typically if you ask back the people who were involved, said, oh, but we thought about that scenario and we thought if we would do that, if that would happen, that we maybe should go slightly more light blue instead of dark blue, but we didn't think it was relevant, but maybe now we should do light blue. And I just am so excited about the idea that you're going to be much better able to capture those nuances of the thought process, so that once the world changes again, right, you made your best possible decision, and then the world spins on its axis. You stand a chance to course correct so much quicker, right? Which of course aids in that resilience tremendously too. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you do the right decision mapping, like we talked about, then we call it, what you talked about, we call it, decision augmentation. The idea is understanding all those small processes in the organization, those small decisions, what impacts what. So it's not just the big decision, right? But sometimes the big decision goes down. There's all those small decisions happening in the organization, in the HR, in the supply chain, in the warehouse, doesn't matter what kind of organization. And if everything's connected, then immediately you see the impact of every decision, of every process. And actually, I won't say real time, but actually near real time, you can change it and, have better impact, better outcomes from the decisions that you're already making. And
yeah, changing is such a loaded word, right? I talk typically about fine tuning because it's not a whole pivot,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's turning the knob just a little bit more and changing the temperature of the water just a little bit, right? It's like every morning
Exactly.
in the shower, you know
Exactly.
exactly how far to put the lever to get the right temperature, and still you need to do a
Yeah.
little most
Yeah.
days.
And
Yeah.
it always helps, because a lot of times, you know what happens? We just use our gut feeling, right? We make those decisions and then we don't understand their impact. And it's like you said, it's not changing the whole decision, but sometimes move a little bit to the right and it will be a little bit better.
Okay, Nissim, as I understand it, you work with your clients setting up the whole process, right? It's not just the system, it's also how will it work for you and in your context and in your organization. If after hearing you here, people are like, I want to know more about forecast, which is the number 4, and then cast. I want to know more. They want to know more about you and your business or how to work with you. What do they do? Where do they go?
So first of all, they can go to our website and see us and approach us through LinkedIn. We will be happy, to share information. We do workshops once in a while. We have a knowledge base where people can also come and learn, as a community, learn a little bit about
Do
decision.
demo like setups?
Exactly. We demo a lot of times in verticals we work, like defense, emergency management, utilities, workforce, all those areas, energy, and we can help them. And at the end of the day, that's the name of the company. We cannot forecast the future. We're trying to do it by running different scenarios. So, and
Okay.
helping understand the decision-making process.
So that's forecast.com?
Forecastai.com. Yeah.
Forecastai.com. Or Nissim Titan on LinkedIn. And I hope after tuning in here today, you're even more excited about decision making and AI. I love doing this episode because I think AI is such a helpful tool in the decision making space. And I think decision making is so key to business resilience and to dealing with this world, right? That's more uncertain, more volatile, more ambiguous by the minute, and it's not going to change, right? It's not going to get any different. So, and of course, I love the link back to the origin in the disaster management space, because I think people there are used to dealing with the unknown, right? And so it's baked into those systems already, or in the way decision making works there. But clearly, this is for anyone and everyone who's doing more complex decision making, which in most of our businesses happens any time of day. So thank you for coming on the show talking about this, Nissim.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love the discussion. I love, your approach. You're talking exactly about things I'm doing, for the last 2 decades. And thank you very much for having me here. And hopefully together, we can help leaders make better decisions.
Yes, onwards and upwards, right? So, and thank you for tuning in today. I hope to have you back in the next episode. This was it for today. Bye. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.